Today I'm going to talk about a specific definition of the word consumerism. You know, we as a society are so focused on the external all the time. Just a continuous loop of excessive stimulation. You know, when looking back at myself, I never felt at peace unless I was, always doing something. You know, for me personally, the only time I felt alive was, when it came time to the weekends. I only felt alive, when I was drinking, partying, taking drugs. This was my definition of having fun. Now, for each of us, the word enjoyment is different. But the result for 95% of us is exactly the same. Now, if you don't believe me, ask yourself this one question. When was the last time you just sat peacefully on your own, relaxing for a few hours with your eyes closed, just, being present in the moment? And when last do you remember your mind being silent for at least 10, 20 minutes? Now, trust me, I get it. We live in stressful times. But doesn't that mean we should be more focused on what's good for us instead of, what makes us happy, happy in inverted commas? What society perceives as happiness is actually just temporary states of euphoria. Now, these temporary states of euphoria can come in many different shapes and forms. But to sum it up in a nutshell, it's everything that stimulates the five senses. We live in a society that's depressed and tired all the time, but at the same time, a society that judges people that are depressed. They get all types of labels attached to them if they're not happy all the time. So what's the result? The result is we have a culture of overstimulated and depressed people. But at the same time, those people don't like dealing with how they really feel. So they distract themselves to get away from how they really feel with the distractions that is a huge part of why they feel what they feel in the first place. I'm not sure if you've seen the image of a snake that's coiled around itself, eating its own tail. That image is really relevant right now. And the worst part is, most people have no idea what they're doing to themselves. When I look back at my own life, I would say easily over 90% of the drama-related incidents that I had with people and situations and car accidents and stolen phones and losing wallets and, so many of these unnecessary situations was almost always when alcohol was involved. But I kept on doing it, even though subconsciously I knew, what I was doing. And then on top of that, you add the partying and the drugs and the late nights, the lack of sleep. When I started doing those things, I suppose like most youngsters that do it at a young age, you start out doing it out of curiosity, and then eventually after enough abuse, using it for long enough, it becomes a necessity. And then for myself specifically, when I used to go out, thereafter, I felt like I could never have fun unless I had those pleasures, either alcohol or drugs. It took me a long time to come to this realization. Then to add an extra layer to that, most of the foods that we buy inside of shops are filled with poisons. And I'm not only referring to, pesticides and things like that, which we all know about. I'm talking about ingredients in food that we're told is okay and it's not. Now, in case you're thinking to yourself, But what is there in life if we don't have all of these entertainment and activities to, give us some sort of pleasure? What do we have in life? Well, what I can say to you is that the way man's is built physiologically, these distractions and pleasures we have around us is not conducive with our evolution, in a physiological sense, which I'm going to get into. The world around us is advancing technologically, but we becoming more miserable. Here's a good example. We can take a look at the new age kids, and we can see what they like. I can say this because my son is very challenging on a day-to-day basis, and they grow up, with technology as like a normal, everyday best friend kind of thing. Do yourself a favor, look up a documentary called The iPad Kids. It's scary. Now, please, this video is not meant to be a drag or kill your buzz or only focus on problems, because that's not what this channel is going to be about. But I have to point out the problems first before I can give you the solution. So that's always where this theme is going to be. I show the problem and then I give the solution. And people keep pushing along. They live their day-to-day lives, consuming, working their day jobs, paying their bills, paying taxes, paying their mortgage with fake smiles on their faces, but go home miserable, which is most people, unfortunately. And then about 75% of people globally will one day pass away from some sort of disease. Does that sound like a life that anybody wants to live? I know that's a life that I don't want to live. Especially if I think about that's the future for my son. I definitely don't want that future for my kids. And I'm sure if you're honest with yourself, you don't want a future like that for yourself or your family neither. There's no better time than now to change it for yourself. So what's the answer? The answer is to start choosing you instead of your distractions. Because at the end of the day, those are the only two choices that you have. Now, as I've said in my previous videos, I am not here trying to convince you of anything. But let's take a look at what our ancient ancestors were trying to warn us of thousands of years ago. If they were trying to warn us of the very same thing I'm trying to tell you about in this video. Now, before I go into that to try and help you connect the dots, I just want to clarify something. I grew up in a Christian home, but this channel is not going to be a channel where I dive deep into any type of religion or religious practice. Most of the time, if I give any reference to religious texts, it's with the intention to try and connect science with what I'm saying and what people have been saying for a very long time, before this current day and age that we're used to. But with that said, am I a believer in God? Yes. Just from my perspective, religion is incomplete. This is where the science-themed approach of this channel basically is like the final missing piece to the puzzle to help make sense of everything as a whole. Okay, so let's take a look. Galatians 5 verse 19 to 21. Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, adultery, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. Those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. 1 Peter 2, I urge you to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Romans 8, verse 5 to 8. Those who live according to the flesh have their minds set on what the flesh desires. The mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God. 1 John 2, verse 16. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, come not from the Father, but from the world. James 4, verse 1 to 3. What causes fights? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but do not have. You ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. Okay, so these are just a few examples that I pulled from the Bible. There are far more. Okay, so let's break down the overall warnings that I got from these texts. All these point to the pleasures of the five senses. Pleasures of the flesh. Being overindulgent will cause you suffering and pain. Giving in to your sensory desires will separate you from God. Now, when using the word God, there's lots of different names for God. There's universe, and there's also some verses in the Bible that point to that God is actually love, which I'm going to get into in a next video. In one of these verses, it even mentions spending what you earn on your pleasures. I mean, that's like the purest definition of consumerism. That's how most of society is. We have a job or we have our own business, and most people, buy luxury items. If they've got enough money, they'll buy cars, they'll buy watches, fancy clothes, you name it, the list goes on and on. Now, for further context, not just in Christianity, but in all of the major religions, Hinduism, Judaism, Buddhism, and Islam, there's a common theme of texts in all of them that speak about pleasures, lust, and desires. So this is a very clear signal that this is extremely important across multiple different cultures and religions. Okay, great. So how does all this tie together? Well, the main neurochemical that's involved in us feeling pleasure when it comes to the five senses is dopamine, which is also known as a reward chemical. But the truth is, it's actually a motivational chemical at its purest core. But here's the main question: what happens to somebody when they become dopamine deficient? Well, the result is depression, fatigue, lack of motivation, and addiction, along with many other health-related issues. Every single human being today living in a modern-day society has some sort of addiction. Yes, you heard that correct. Every single human in a modern-day society is addicted to something. And if you're honest with yourself, on a day-to-day basis, how energetic, motivated, and happy do you really feel? Now, I mentioned a little while ago that word God. And this is where things start to get interesting, when we start to bridge that gap between religion and science. But this I'm going to get into in detail in the next video. If you have watched this far, There's a very good reason why. It's because deep down, you know, in your core, that you know what I'm saying is the truth. I'll see you in the next video.